Welcome back, everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about performing rights organizations. I'm not an expert in that field, and I will do a separate video with, someone from an actual PRO, probably ASCAP. But for now, I just wanted to give an overview because a lot of people are asking about this. So, as already mentioned, PRO stands for Performing Rights Organization. Every country, or almost every country, has one, sometimes 2 or 3, and they all exchange information. You can also be registered with multiple. I'm personally with ASCAP and with GEMA. ASCAP covers me for North America, and then GEMA covers me for the rest of the world. You can also be a member of 3 or 4. I don't know if there's a cap on it, but what you have to do is you have to disclose that you're a member of multiple PROs, and you have to tell them what territory they're supposed to cover for you. So what do PROs do? They track public performances of your registered music, and then they collect royalties on your behalf and forward them to you. Public performances can be radio performances, regular TV performances, concert venues, clubs. Outside of the US, it's also theaters, as in movie theaters. It also goes for streaming services, like you name it. Whenever there's a public performance of your music or a movie that you scored or a TV show, you get money from them. They will collect it for you. So what happens is the venue or the broadcaster, they have to submit sheets basically detailing what they played, when they play it, how long they played it, and whatnot. And then they submit that to the performing rights organization in that country. And they basically have a database, and they can look up who owns what of all these titles. And then they can calculate of the fees that were paid by that venue or broadcaster. They can then calculate what percentage goes to, what studio or what individual. So this is why cue sheets are important. I made a whole video about cue sheets that you can check out if you want to know what these look like. But basically on those cue sheets for every TV show and every movie, it details for each piece of music that's in there who owns what. And then the performing rights organizations very often collect money for people that aren't members of that particular performing rights organization. But so in their database, they can see, they played something in this country and it belongs to a person that is a member of ASCAP. Then they take that portion and they forward it to ASCAP, and then ASCAP distributes it to that member. They will also hold money for titles that haven't been registered yet. It happens a lot. Ideally, it doesn't happen, but it does happen. I myself have some titles that have already aired on TV, and the cue sheets were done afterwards. So they will hold that money and wait for the titles to be registered. Sometimes they will also write to you and go, hey, it says here that you scored this and we got money for this, but we don't have any cue sheets for this. Stuff like that. They will hold it for a while. I don't think they will hold it forever, though. So be sure that eventually you do register your titles. Usually on every title, on every song, but also on every film, TV title, there's a so-called writer's share and there's a publisher's share. Usually the writer's share goes to the composer, and then the publisher's share goes to the studio. Unless it's like a low-budget indie production, then sometimes a case can be made for the composer also keeping the publishing rights. In America, only the production can actually submit cue sheets. They don't usually accept cue sheets submitted by composers, which personally I hate. In other countries, they will allow for the composers to submit cue sheets, and only if the production submits a contradictory cue sheet, then they will go with whatever the production submitted. But normally, they should be identical. I don't like the American system, mainly because on a lot of smaller indie productions, especially with first-time filmmakers or, very young studios, they don't understand any of this. And so they will just simply not register the music. They will not make a publisher account, and then they will just not do this. And you cannot collect any of your royalties because they decided not to register the music and you can't register it yourself. And I think that's kind of iffy. I feel like ASCAP and BMI and CSAC should really be protecting their their members, their creators a bit more there and not just the publishers. Because yeah, I have so many titles that just haven't been registered and I keep running after the productions to do it and they just won't. And I don't really have another way of getting those cue sheets in with the PROs. So it's kind of, yeah, a problem that I think a lot of people working in the indie world are facing. You can also view cue sheets and PRO members. All of this is public information. Every PRO that I know of has a public registry on their website that you can go to and you can just look up titles and see who owns what. Streaming services function a little bit differently currently. They're very new, so there aren't really a lot of laws yet. For the other broadcasters, there are actual laws in place and you know, it's much more regulated. With streaming services, it's still very unregulated because it's just so new that a lot of laws haven't been made yet. Which was the case with radio and other broadcasters as well. Like back when radio was new, they did not pay royalties either, because nobody knew what it was and that should happen. But so with streaming services, currently what's happening is, as I understand it, they collect the subscription fees. A lot of them don't have ads, so there's no ad revenue on there. And then they will basically look at what titles were streamed the most and basically distribute the money based on that, which seems fair. The fees are much lower than regular TV and, you know, overseas theaters and all that stuff. The payouts for that are much higher than streaming services. It's obviously not very favorable if you're on a streaming service with like really heavy titles that you know are going to be streamed over and over again. Then you're going to lose if you worked on a smaller production. And another issue is that they don't have to actually disclose the numbers. So when I get my royalty statements, I just get a random number. Sometimes it doesn't even say for what titles. So nobody can really check anything. You know, you don't know how often your title was streamed or anything. It's just not disclosed and they don't have to. So it's kind of the oversight over streaming is currently not really there. The reason this kind of makes sense is because you have a lower reach per play. If your title plays on TV, then you reach thousands or even millions of people with one play, right? But in streaming, it's just one person per stream, maybe a family per stream watching your content. So naturally, the payout should probably be lower. But yeah, so we haven't really figured out how to make this sustainable for everyone, because royalties are usually, you know, every composer's pension plan and healthcare and mortgage, and you know, it's the stuff that you can't really afford with the upfront payments usually. And if that kind of reduces too much or falls away, then, you know, this career might not be quite sustainable anymore. And so we're going to have to figure that one out going forward, because that's kind of a big one. Another thing is video games are usually buyouts, so there are usually no royalties collected on video games unless there's like a concert performance or something. Video games solve that issue by just having vastly higher upfront fees. Usually I get for like 10 minutes of video game music, I get the same amount of money that I get for like a whole feature film. So they already know there's not going to be passive income for you most of the time. So they will just take all the rights, but then they will also pay you massively for it. So that's kind of a solution. That could also be a solution with streaming services, that they're just going to have to pay more upfront if they are not going to, you know, pay back end that much. Streaming services also more and more are trying to buy the writer's share from you. But again, if they're going to do that, similar to video games, then the numbers would have to be, you know, worth it, really. I'd always be careful selling your rights because you'll never get those back. Some performing rights organizations also don't allow you to actually sign away all of your rights. GEMA in Germany is very strict about that, I think. And in America, they're less strict about it. I think the rules are the same, but they're not really enforced, which is kind of a shame because it opens the door to a lot of composers using ghostwriters and then taking all of their cue sheet and registering. Like, you know, there are 7 people that worked on a score, but only 2 are on the cue sheet, you know? It's kind of a shame that this is very, very common practice at this point, that people they're just forced to give up ownership of their work. And so none of them will ever see passive income, and it's like a whole culture, especially in Los Angeles. I hear also in London, that's a bit of a problem. I wish all PROs would really crack down a lot more on that. But in any case, try not to sign away your rights is like the the gist of the story. Keep your rights as much as you can. Sign up with a PRO in your country, or maybe in a country that a lot of your titles are released in, and really make sure you collect that passive income and that all your music is registered and tracked.